heading south of the Mason-Dixon. This is the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Here is your host, Brian McClanahan.
Welcome back to the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. This is your host, Brian McClanahan, and this is episode 238, covering the week of November 9th through November 13th, 2020. Glad to have you back in the program. Very glad to be here. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, like our Facebook page, and subscribe to our YouTube page. You can find all those social media accounts at our webpage, abbevilleinstitute.org. That's ABBEVILLE institute.org. While you're there, give us an email address. We'll give you a free ebook, Exploring the Southern Tradition. It is a great book by 20 Abbeville Institute scholars on a wide variety of topics, and again, free of charge. You can also purchase that book at Amazon if you look it up there if you want a hard copy of it. And of course, if you shop at Amazon, you can click on that Amazon Smile tab at the top of our page, abbevilleinstitute.org, and every time you shop at Amazon, you'll give us a little bit of money. So it's painless. You don't even know it's happening, but Amazon helps fund the Abbeville Institute. What an awesome thing. You can also support the Abbeville Institute by clicking on that support tab at the top of the page. You can click on that donor options, and you can have a monthly, annual, or one-time gift. We do exist on your generous contributions alone. So if you like our podcast, if you like our website, if you like our conferences, if you like the things that we do, consider a tax-deductible donation to the full extent of the law. You can also click on that shop tab while you're at Abbeville Institute under that support button, and of course you can get your Abbeville Institute apparel. It's high quality embroidered stuff. We've got Christmas coming up, makes a great gift, so think about that as well. Lots of great ways to support the Institute, of course. Always share our material on social media. If you like our podcast, rate it wherever you get your podcasts. Download our free mobile app. You can have the Abbeville Institute on the go, and so that is a great way to keep up with the podcast, with our lectures. We've got well over 200 lectures free of charge. I mean, most of what we do is free of charge. So again, that's why we need your financial support and your financial contributions. So think about that. We've got more videos coming. We've got Zoom conferences. Now, I know there's a dispute whether these things are conferences. We have Zoom calls, Zoom conferences coming up. We might have one in December, so it depends on what we can get together for that. But the chances of us having one in December are pretty high. We're definitely going to have them, though, starting next year, where we have these Zoom conferences, in addition to everything else we do. So maybe once a month we'll get together and we'll have the ability for 100 people or so to come and watch Abbeville scholars talk about different topics. And it's going to be a great thing to do. So look out for all that stuff. It's all coming. We've got a lot to do. And of course, it's essential. Because if you look at what's going on in the world now and you look at what's happening, education is the key to everything. It's not enough simply to complain about what's going on, and we all can do that. But I think one thing that needs to be made clear is that since the end of the war, and when I talk about the war, I'm talking about 1865. Since the end of the war in 1865, one thing has been clear, and that is the South has been made the whipping boy for every particular evil in American society. Anything that's bad in America came from the South. Anything. And anything that's good in America, if a Southerner did it, well, then they're honorary Northerners. They're honorary Yankees. This is something that Clyde Wilson often points out. You have honorary Yankees. So we've got a situation in America where the South is always perceived as the bad guy. Now, in the New South period, people like R.L. Dabney pointed this out. Look, everything that we're looking at, whether it's communism, socialism, of course, he was also pointing out other isms like feminism and some other things that he thought were going to be a major problem in American society. Leftism generally, progressivism, all of this was coming out of the North, and the South served as a brake on those things. And if you look at the 2020 election, and you look at how it's worked out, theoretically, Georgia went for Biden. I think sometimes it's not necessarily that it was a pro-Biden vote as much as it was an anti-Trump vote for some in the state of Georgia. And we know that people are moving into Georgia and North Carolina and South Carolina. We know people are moving into all these states from all over the United States, and they're voting the way they voted when they're in these other states. We've had articles on this, and Casey Chalk wrote a wonderful article about this, talking about Northern Virginia in another publication. Of course, Casey Chalk has started writing for us here at the Institute. And how Northern Virginia isn't even Virginia anymore. I mean, there's nothing there in Northern Virginia that's Virginia. And you see that. I mean, Virginia has gone completely, it's not even a purple state. it's a blue state. When you want to talk about red being Republican, blue being Democrat, it's a blue state, except for the rural areas. And this is where we get into decentralization. One of the things we've pointed out at the Institute now since 2002 is that none of this should really get you down. Expect it. Expect it. Expect what's happening now to continue to happen and, in fact, accelerate. If Biden certainly does win, and it looks like that all the legal wrangling about Trump getting the election, I don't think any of that's going to pan out. I didn't expect it to. There would have to be too much evidence that the federal courts would ignore it. They're generally going to err on the side of caution. Now you have Republican legislators in swing states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, states that could send two sets of electors. If they really did believe there was voter fraud in those states, they could send two sets of electors to the Electoral College, and then Mike Pence could essentially decide the election. They're not going to do that. You can't rely on the center to reform itself. You can't rely on the center to do anything that's going to rock the boat, because that delegitimizes the center. It delegitimizes the entire process. This is what I think that many Americans are starting to see. 70 million Americans, I think, do believe that their vote didn't count in this election. They do believe that this election showed that the entire system is rigged. And if nothing else, I've said this since day one when Trump became president in January of 2017. If nothing else, this is going to, I think, in many ways, accelerate how people think about the central government, or the negative opinions about the central government. We've had a number of books out this year on secession. We've had a book by Buckley on secession. We've had a book by a leftist named Kreitner on secession. And I think Americans are starting to think about, maybe America really is too big. Maybe the center is unworkable. Maybe all these, you can't drain the swamp. Trump couldn't drain the swamp. It can't happen. Trump can't do that. There's no way he can do that. He showed it. And I think all that faith in the executive is misguided, because that's the kind of superhero complex that Americans have been made to accept. Superman's going to come in and save the day. Batman's going to come in and save the day. We're going to have some group of superheroes come in and do it. No, the superheroes have to be you at the state and local level. And this is something the Institute has been talking about for a long time. What is true and valuable in the Southern tradition? Well, working from the bottom up, deciding that that system is not legitimate. We know that Americans talked about that. I mean, this is the American tradition at the end of the day. I mean, in reality, when you look at the Declaration of Independence, which, of course, is written by a Southerner, but when you look at that idea of separation and decentralization, this is an American principle. The Southerners just held on to it longer and more forcibly than the North did. But that's something that I think Americans are starting to think about. Hey, what can we do? How can we think about this current monstrosity in Washington, D.C.? And is there another answer to it? What we're going to get with the Biden administration is Obama light. Biden, of course, is not as leftist as Obama was, but he's being pulled in that direction by, there's now a civil war brewing in the Democrat Party. He's being pulled in that direction by the leftists in the Democrat Party, the progressives. Kamala Harris has been called the most leftist senator in Washington. And Biden's already said, look, I'm going to listen to Kamala Harris. Well, that's because, I think Biden understands he is not going to be serving 2 terms. I don't know if there's any way he can. Physically, he might not be able to do it. Maybe he can. But I think that if some things continue down the road and Biden shows his hand, which he's showing his hand now, and I think some Americans, even who voted for Biden, are having buyer's remorse on Biden right now because of the coronavirus and lockdowns and other things. We're going to see, it was the leftist states during the Trump administration that were showing a lot of obstinance, whether it was California, Washington, Oregon, some of these states. I think you're going to see conservative states now be obstinate with the Biden administration. And why? The question comes down to this and why. This is a commentary, but the question comes down to why. Americans are more divided now than at any point. If you go back to the Reconstruction period and you look at the close elections there, Americans still had generally the same views on society as a whole. They just had different views on what the political economy should be, or how we should structure the central authority, but most Americans were still Christian. Most Americans still had the same general views on society. We don't have that anymore. That's gone. And when you have a situation where 50.8% of the population can determine what the other 49.2% of the population can do, you're setting up a recipe for disaster. Because essentially what you have is not even 51 people determining what 49 people can do. That is democracy. If you look at it, a bare majority, and that's what we're in. And those 51 people have remarkably different views than the 49 people. And so how do you peacefully solve this problem? Well, Boyd Cathy talked about that in the first essay of the week, is separation the answer. Should we just agree to part ways, that we're not going to get along, we won't get along, and now the problem with all of this, of course, is if you look at, just take example, some southern states, we often say, well, the South needs to secede. Well, what does that leave you? Look at some southern states. Look at Georgia right now. You've got a center part of Georgia, Atlanta, which dominates the state. Even in things like water usage in Georgia, the Chattahoochee River goes right through Atlanta, and Atlanta gets to decide how much everybody else gets downstream. And that creates problems. So think about Georgia. If Georgia really is turning blue, if Georgia is going that way, and that's because of immigration and other things, well, what does that mean? What does that mean for the state of Georgia? But more importantly, if you've got a city that's determining what it means for the rest of the population, and you're talking about, again, if Georgia really did go blue, you're talking about 10,000 people deciding the fate of Georgia. 10,000 people. For the rest of the millions of people in the state, this is how bare majorities are dangerous. This is why John C. Calhoun talked about the concurrent majority. You can't just have bare majorities. You need a substantial majority. And the minority should be able to veto what the majority does if what the majority is doing is dangerous for the minority. And think about, we'll just take this COVID situation. Churches are being shut down across the United States. That is dangerous. Samuel Alito is now being excoriated for this, but put out a statement saying, look, I think COVID has done a lot to destroy civil liberties in America. That's not a political statement. That's a fact. It has. People have, left and right have said this. Civil liberties are being destroyed in America. So because of the pandemic, quote unquote, and we know a lot of people are getting sick, and we know that people are dying from this thing, and we know it's a horrible virus, and nobody wants to get it. But a lot of that comes down to personal responsibility and what you're willing to do or not willing to do. At the end of the day, though, should minorities, and if Christians really are the minority in the United States, if less than 50% of the people now go to church, if less than 50% of Americans identify as Christian, and the percentages are getting in that area now, should Christians not be able to defend themselves against a hostile majority? If we can have political rallies, which are now the American civic religion, where everybody can stand around and hoot and holler about somebody winning an election, or dance in the middle of New York Central Park, or drink champagne in front of the White House, ignoring all health and safety protocols, why can't you go meet at church? Well, because church is the enemy. If it said that Donald Trump rallies caused 700 deaths and 40,000 coronavirus infections, why is it okay to have Black Lives Matter rallies or leftist political meetings in the middle of Chicago? Why are these things okay, is the real question. And I think Americans are waking up to this. At least a close to majority, or a majority of Americans are waking up to this. So this is where the concurrent majority actually does work, because that minority, if it's not a majority, if the people on the right really are 49 people out of 100, well, then they should have the same kind of protections as anyone else. And political status is becoming just as important in American society as anything else. People identify now more with politics than ever in American history. It's not about denomination. People don't worry about whether you're a Lutheran or a Baptist or a Methodist or a Catholic as much anymore. People don't worry about those things. They worry about who'd you vote for. Did you vote for Biden or did you vote for Trump? Did you vote for Clinton or did you vote for Trump? Did you vote for Abrams or did you vote for Kemp? Right? Who did you vote for? these political minorities are becoming important. And of course, in an age where one thing the Trump administration could have done is made political minorities a protected status. You can be able to voice your opinions and not have, and these things are protected because this is the new religion in America, politics. People are fighting as viciously now about politics as they were about religion. Well, not quite as viciously, but certainly it's getting to that point. There's a lot of violence now. It could get to a point where we're looking at the 1600s again, where people were killing each other over religion in the West. Are we going to kill each other over politics? We know we killed each other over politics in the 19th century. I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope that we can come up with peaceful solutions to these things, and that's what the Abbeville Institute has always been about. So Boyd Cathy's suggestion of peace, let's have peace. Let's have real peace, decentralization. Let's let people live and let live. Let's let California be California. Let's let Alabama be Alabama, and we'll get along. Let's let Massachusetts be Massachusetts, and maybe have a loose union for common defense if the United States is attacked. Well, that's what the point is of that, not to expand the empire. But if the United States is attacked, we can come to the aid of California. We can come to the aid of Massachusetts if you're in Alabama, and vice versa. Lots of good people in all these states. All these states aren't corrupt. All the people in these states aren't bad. There's good people in every state. And I think that's something that also needs to be made clear. But the problem comes down to education. And I know people will say, well, at least Donald Trump would say positive things about Robert E. Lee. But how does that trickle down? Is the American education system, is the establishment education system doing the exact same thing? The piece that we ran on Friday by Jack Marquardt on Slavery and Emancipation 101, I mean, he's pointing out things that people used to know. Hey, the slave trade was dominated by New Englanders. Slavery was not just a Southern institution, it was a Northern institution as well for much of American history. This is not just a sin of the South. It's not just an American original sin. You hear this. Even people on the right will say slavery is America's original sin. No, it's not. Slavery has been around since the beginning of time. It's not an American original sin. Americans had it. But so did lots of other places in the world. And in fact, they had it in Africa where the slaves came from. That's how they got the slaves to bring over to the Americas, whether it's South America, Central America, the Caribbean, or North America. It was African slavery that produced African slavery in the Americas. So we've got this disconnect between education and politics. And because history's become so politicized, this is when Trump creates his history commission and does that, which of course is problematic because of the people he picked to do it. I think that's going to go away in the Biden administration. I think you're also going to see a Biden executive order bringing back critical race theory being part of your professional development training or your sensitivity training at your local place of employment. You're going to see that again. There's no doubt that's going to be one of the first things he does. I know he's talking about opening up immigration and other things, but I can almost guarantee that's going to be one of the first things. Just like when Ralph Northam had the opportunity, when the Democrats took control of the Virginia legislature, to get rid of Confederate monuments. Because you see, at the end of the day, this is a war on history. It really is a war on history. It's a war on our collective consciousness in America. What is America? When you talk about, when Obama writes in his new forthcoming memoir, that America is a possibility. Elizabeth Warren says the same thing. And when the neocons write disparaging things about John C. Calhoun and the South and say that America is a proposition nation, they're all in agreement. It's not a real, tangible, concrete thing. When you have Dan Crenshaw, who is a neocon legislator from Texas, stand up and say that America is an idea. What is that? America is not an idea. It's a real, tangible thing. People have done real, tangible things. America is not an idea. But with friends like these on the right, where do you go from here? Well, this is where James Rutledge Roche talks about the remnant, the Southern remnant. I know some people complain the article is long. It is. And James is a thorough writer. That's one thing you can say about James Roche. He is a thorough writer. And he has a great book out from Shotwell Press on Southern Fire Eaters. We published some of the chapters of it. He reworked them on the Abbeville Institute website years ago. But he talks about what you have to do. This is where you start small. You got to work in your communities. You got to work with your family, your church, your local civic organizations. This is exactly what the progressives did over 100 years ago. And of course, that bore fruit, and that now you have progressives everywhere. So you're going to lose a lot. And I think one thing that Sam Ervin pointed out, and one thing Southerners have always understood, and just to plug something, I've been doing a Southern Cultural and Intellectual History course at McClanahan Academy. It's 4 parts, and each part has 25 lectures, and I focus on different parts of Southern cultural and intellectual history. But one thing that Southerners have been well made aware of since 1865 is that they lost. And Sam Ervin said that this is actually better in some ways. It helps you, defeat helps you shake the glory out. One of the reasons why Robert E. Lee was considered so important in American history is because he lost. It's not because he won. You see, too many Yankees are front runners. You're only good if you win. Sometimes losing is as effective. George Washington would not have been as effective as a general if he had won every battle. It was losing that allowed Washington to connect with his men and come out stronger. It's not saying you want to lose. Nobody wants to lose. Certainly no one wants to lose. Lee didn't want to lose. The South didn't want to lose. But allow them to reflect and be patient. You lose sometimes. You're not always going to win. Things are not always going to break your way. And how do you handle that? And I think the progressives, they were losing a lot in the 19th century. So what did they do? They refocused their efforts on where they could win. Where can we still win in the South? You can still win in your local government. You can still win in your family. You still have control over those things. You can still win in your church. You can still win in those places. There are still opportunities all over the United States to win. And when you win there and you keep the culture, you win bigger. You see, part of the problem is we've got a cultural divide in America. When half the population thinks global warming is a major problem in America, we've got some issues, right? So this is where we are in America right now, and why the Southern tradition is still important, and why James Roche's article on Thursday, The Southern Remnant, is so important. I'm sorry, on Wednesday, excuse me. And then we had Josh Doggerel. We'll take our stand. Josh attended our conference in Charleston in October. That was one of our best conferences ever. We had a lot of people there. I think people were ready to get out, be around people, and enjoy some companionship and some camaraderie in this particular very difficult time for a lot of. It's not just what's happening politically; it's what's happening emotionally for people and everything. This is a difficult time for people, and so Josh Doggerel had this wonderful little piece about what that made him think about. And one thing, there's a similarity between James's piece and Josh's piece, and that is their use of the Bible, use of religion to help soothe some of the angst that we all feel in American society right now. But he talked about how this piece made him, or this conference made him think about some of the books that he'd loved. One of them, of course, is I'll Take My Stand. And how important that book is. The first, and we're going to have all these lectures up in short order, the first lecture of the conference was a discussion of Clyde Wilson's piece from 1969 in Modern Age, the Jeffersonian conservative tradition, which was blasted by the neocons. They hated this thing. Mel Bradford wrote back to Clyde saying, "Your piece is good. Don't worry about it." And here we are, 50 years later, 51 years later, and how current that piece actually is, 51 years later. And what he said in 1969 holds as much today, and we're going to run a piece by Clyde on Monday, tomorrow. I'm recording this podcast a little late this week, but Monday, tomorrow, we're going to have a piece by Clyde. And he talks about essentially the same thing. One of the things I loved about that piece, and I've read it several times now, And I thought back to a conversation that I had with Clyde when I was in graduate school. And I came to him and I said, I was reading Russell Kirk's The Conservative Mind, and how could he put John Adams and John C. Calhoun in the same book? Are they not different? And Clyde said to me, this is, he said, well, perhaps Kirk was too eclectic, too broad in his choice of conservatives. Clyde said that in 1969. And when we were writing our Forgotten Conservatives in American History, we were throwing around names, and a few names that I threw around. He said, no, I don't think that person is our kind of conservative. But if you would look at, and one of them was Robert Taft. And when you look at Taft, I mean, certainly he checks a lot of boxes, but is he really our kind of conservative in the South? And this is the difficult situation we have, defining that Southern conservative tradition and what that means for America, and it's something we do quite a bit. But it all comes down to education. It all comes down to education. It comes down to what we do here. It comes down to your support of that. And the last piece we had for this week was actually published on Tuesday by Phil Lee, who's just done Phil Lee is doing a yeoman's service in going out and trying to go after some of the people who say such stupid things in the academy. And he is an amateur. I mean, Phil Lee doesn't have a PhD. He's not a professional historian. He loves history. He writes better history than most of the professionals, frankly. And you had that with many people, even in the Southern tradition. Clifford Dowdy is a nice example of that. You had people that wrote great history that were not necessarily trained historians. One of my favorites, of course, one of the most important Southern historians is Douglas Southall Freeman. It's the exact same thing with him. These are amateurs. Shelby Foote, these are amateurs. And they write better history. But Phil Lee wrote this piece, The False Cause Narrative, and he took apart this video from this professor saying, well, slavery definitely was the cause of the war. And Southerners don't even want to debate it. They're afraid to debate us. So Phil Lee reaches out to the guy and says, I'll debate you. Crickets. No response. Why? Because they're the ones that really don't want to debate it. They're the ones that want to just have the other side go away. And they want to have it go away because they want a monopoly on public opinion. Because it's political. At the end of the day, for these people, it's political. Because what happens if there was a more complex cause of the war, what happens if Southerners really were valiant people and people that should be admired? It blows apart the entire social justice progressive agenda. It destroys everything. What happens if the South was actually right in seceding from the Union and that the North were the bad guys in trying to force the South back in the Union, regardless of the issues? What happens if that really was right? What happens if the South, as the Kennedys said in 1991 with their book, what happens if the South really was right? Now, there's a new volume of that coming out with Shotwell Press that I will review, and it's very soon, I think. I don't know the exact publication, but what happens if the South really was right in all of that? That the Southern position was the strong legal position, that the Southern position was the correct position, regardless, that self-determination is the American position, regardless of what you think about it, but it was right. What happens if the South was right? It blows apart everything that took place during that war and everything after. And Phil Lee points this out in this piece, that Northerners understood this in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, that punishing the South was not the right thing to do because this was a question of legal right and wrong, and that the South was simply operating under the supposition that it was part of the American tradition. So you don't punish them for that. And Union soldiers who should have been the ones who were the most vindictive, many of them had dropped that by the 1880s, by the 1870s. They had dropped that hatred for Southerners. Now, it didn't mean it wasn't there in the 1860s. It didn't mean it wasn't there during Reconstruction. Certainly, many Northerners wanted the South punished and punished fearfully. This is where Richard Weaver started coming around to Lincoln and saying, Lincoln, for all of the problems that Lincoln had, he would have been maybe the best thing the South could have had. That shooting Lincoln was horrible for the South. This was part of the reconciliation spirit, that shooting Lincoln actually caused the South more pain because Lincoln might have been able to manage politically the reptiles in Congress better than Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson wasn't any more lenient than I think Lincoln would have been on Reconstruction. But Lincoln could have managed it better. He had political capital that Andrew Johnson did not have. And maybe Lincoln could have gotten through Reconstruction and things would have resumed. We know Lincoln in January of 1865 was willing to put off some of the more punitive measures till the 1890s. He was willing to do things. Just come on back in. We'll deal with the issues later. You can't have slavery anymore. In fact, but he did say, he suggested to Alexander Stephens, you come back in right now, you can vote down the 13th Amendment. But we know that by April of 1865, that was non-negotiable. But certainly there could have been some other type of structure, a relationship between the federal government and the states, that maybe military reconstruction doesn't happen. Maybe some of the more harsh things about Reconstruction don't happen, and you don't have this kind of animosity that's brewed now for 150 years in America. Who knows? But part of this is education, and Phil Lee, again, is doing a great job. We just need to keep putting this stuff out there. It's why your money, your financial contribution helps. Our website is not free. All the things we do are not free, even though we give most of it away free of charge. I mean, when you make a contribution, you're helping support that website. You're helping support these conferences. You're helping support this podcast. You're helping support the videos. You're helping support Abbeville Institute publications. You're helping all of those things because all that money goes into being dispersed out and helping all these things happen. Even if it's $25, $10, whatever you got, and you want to do that. One of the things I often say, if you like to buy a cup of coffee from a fancy coffee place every month, and you do that once a week, maybe you do it every day. Let's say you do that every day. That's $3 a day, and you go to work 20 days a week, or 20 days a month. That's $60 a month on coffee. Could you afford some of that money? Is the Southern tradition worth $5 a month? Could you forego one cup of coffee a month to help the Southern tradition, help us do this? That's $60 a year. You might spend $60 a month on coffee. Could you do that? Could you give us $10 a month? That's $120 a year. Well, let me tell you, that goes to help us do these things. And we are making a fundraising push right now. You are going to see emails to this effect in November and December. It's the end of the year. We're trying to get people interested in donating. These are the things we do and why we need your support. We are completely dependent on you to do this, to keep these things going. We do appreciate every dollar you give us. Of course, we will have a podcast this next week. Then we've got Thanksgiving week. We'll have a shortened week for that. We'll have a couple of weeks in December, and then we usually shut things down for the last couple of weeks in December. So we've got a few more episodes of the Abbeville. We can review at the Abbeville Institute the rest of the year, and then we'll be ramping things back up in January. So keep looking for these things. Download our free mobile app. You get the podcast on the go. While you're thinking about your end of the year taxes and everything else you got to do, you can make a tax-deductible donation to the Institute to the full extent of the law. And that does help us do everything we need to do. And we have a lot more things we want to do, and it all comes down to you. So if you like it, if you like hearing me every week, if you like the articles every week, get our daily dose of Dixie Monday through Friday. Get going with that. It will. We can turn this around. The success story we had in Chattanooga is just encouraging that video that we produced actually swung a vote in keeping a Confederate monument where it stood. That is a wonderful thing. Imagine magnifying that out now and growing that exponentially. That's what we need to be doing. So, until next time, good day.